Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to learn how to save key-value pairs, retrieve data saved to the device, and use this data to update what the user sees on screen. Let's get started. Make sure you're in mainActivity.java, and right below the Start Activity 2 button click method, we're going to add the method public void counter button click. And make sure we add the view argument. We will be using shared preferences to save our first set of data. Shared preferences saves data using something called key-value pairs. Let's see how those work. A key-value pair stores data just like that. One key maps to one value. In this case, the key is always a string, but the value can be any primitive data type. So to find this value later, we search for it with its key. This is basically the same thing we did when passing our text from main activity to activity 2. Back to our code, let's type shared preferences shared pref equals get preferences. If we hit Control P, we can see that the argument it is looking for is int mode. Let's type context dot, and we can see the modes available. We want mode private, which says that only this application may access these preferences. Next, let's create a counter variable and set it equal to sharedpref.getInt. The key we will use is counter key. The second argument is the default value in case counter key is not found. The default value will only be used the first time this app is ran, since there will not have been any data saved yet. Now let's increment counter, since that's what this button is keeping track of. And let's change the text of the button. Remember that the view argument sent to this method is the actual button, so we can use that to get a reference for our view. We first need to cast it to button, then type set text counter colon space plus counter. Good. Now that we are done using our data, let's save it. We're going to do this with the preference editor class. Type shared preferences.editor editor equals sharedpref.edit. Then editor.putInt, and this is where the key value pair comes in. For the first argument, type counter key, and the second argument, type counter. And to save these changes, type editor.apply. Let's change to our XML file, and just like we did before, we have to wire up the button to the method we just wrote. This time, let's do it through the text editor. Switch to the text tab and scroll down to the button. Right before the closing brace, add a new line and type Android::onClick equals counter button click. Now let's start our emulator and see how we did. Good. When we press our button, the counter does indeed increment each time. But let's see if this data persists after we restart our app. Click the stop button so we know our program is no longer active, and click the play button. Well, it still says button, so we need to change that so the correct number is shown right when the app starts, but we can still click it to see what happens. Hey, it didn't forget our counter. So let's add that last bit of code. The easiest way to do that is to simply copy what we need of our existing code into the onCreate method. This method is called as the activity starts, so any logic you need to do before that, do in this method. Now we no longer have our view variable, so let's switch that with find view by ID r.id.counter button. Now let's restart our app. Perfect, but one last change. Did you notice how the counter started at 11 even though we closed the app when it was at 10? We forgot to remove one line. We don't need to increment the counter the first time we set the variable, so let's remove that now. I like to leave these little mistakes in because these are things you'll run into every program you make. I remember thinking it was weird to start and test my programs so often, like I must be doing something wrong, but it's all part of the development process. Alright, that was part 1. In part 2, we're going to see how to save larger amounts of data to a file. We're going to learn how to save custom classes. See you next class.